So, how do you build a personal brand as a thought leader? How do you become that guy doing that thing, the one that shows up on people's feeds, the one that people say you need to speak to him or her every time they mention your niche, your specialist interest area? Well, it's a journey, and I want to talk about that journey because it takes time, it takes effort, and there needs to be a process for that. But the great thing is, it's a journey of constant improvement where you improve your content, your material, you build your personal brand, and you professionalize your approach. So let's have a look at the 3 steps of that thought leadership journey. It's real simple, and this is what I'll teach you, and this is what we will work with you on in joining together on this thought leadership journey, taking you from the beginning all the way up to thought leadership. Now, you may be on that journey already, but you may not be doing it in the context of podcast guesting. So how does this work? 3 steps here. Let me explain the 3 steps, and we'll go through these steps when we work together at the Podcast Guesting AG, starting off with the POC, proof of concept. This stage is all about how do we take your material? How do we take your content, those years of experience that you have earned, those connections that you have created, those ideas, that ability to see the pain points in your industry that only you know because you have years working in your industry. How do you take that and package it to work on the podcast format? Now, you may already be a public speaker. You already may be an author or a blogger or have a great social media profile. You already may have 20 years of experience in your industry. The challenge is, how do you package it for a podcast? Because for many people, this is new. This is a new territory. How do you do it in a way that is authentic? How do you do it in a way that is engaging? This isn't public speaking, folks. Yes, you can take ideas from public speaking, but the feeling, the vibe of podcast guesting is very different. It's all about that intimacy, that conversation that you create together. That's step 1, POC, proof of concept. Can you do this? Can you create interesting content? And can you target key podcasts that resonate with your message? And one of the things we'll work together on in the POC is refining the audience avatar. And the audience avatar is about who are the audience, who is that listener for you in that niche for your target subject. And how do we package the content to match them, your key messages and their interest? That's the key part of the POC, proof of concept. If you can successfully complete the POC, the next stage in your journey is taking it to scale. What does that mean? A lot of people, when they do podcast guesting by themselves, for example, or they're doing it as a side gig, they don't get to the second stage because scale is all about building a process and professionalizing your approach. You need a podcast guesting funnel. You need to be able to reformat your content and push it out in an omnichannel way. These are all tactics that we can help you with. It's got to be focusing on the sweet spot. If you want to scale from being somebody that does a podcast once in a while to somebody that people are talking about, that your podcasts are doing the talking for, that is having conversations with people even while you sleep because they are interacting with the podcast that you have done and the back catalog of podcasts that you've done over how many months or years. If you want that to happen, you have to have structure. You can't just simply go at it brute force and bang away at doing podcast after podcast after podcast, because after some time, the novelty and the novelty with your audience as well will wear off. You need to be able to, what we say at the agency is get your audience over the line. And getting them over the line simply means it's not a hard task. Taking the audience, which is other people's audiences, leveraging these highly curated, aligned audience that podcast hosts have created that you can guest on in front of, taking their interest and converting them into your audience. That doesn't happen on its own. That doesn't happen organically. You need a system. And a great way to do that is to build a podcast guesting funnel. And this is something I will work with you on, because it's about how do you get to the second stage and really make this successful. Because if you're successful, I'm successful doing this. If you're successful, you want to do more of it. And if you want to do more of it, it helps me grow the podcast guesting agency. And I know if you don't build a professional funnel and you don't convert your audience, the novelty of doing podcast guesting will eventually wear off. And that's not good for me, and it's not good for you. So what I want is a long-term relationship where I can take you from proof of concept to scale, where you are now generating leads. You are now getting emails. You are now getting people who listen to your podcasts, signing up for your newsletter, and eventually come back round and exerting some kind of network effect, which is the compounding, meaning that if you can start getting people onto your newsletter that follow you, that are interested in your podcast guesting, every time you send out a new edition of your newsletter talking about your new episodes, guess what? It sends them back to the podcast or the new podcast. And that therefore means you get this compounding, because not only are you able to guest on a podcast, you can also drive your fans to the podcast, which spikes the numbers for the podcast host. They like that. They're more likely to invite you back for a future episode. Apple and Spotify love it as well. They're more likely now to promote your podcast because they think it has an audience, which now takes us to step 3. You have proven that you could do this. You're way beyond proof of concept. You've now built a funnel which converts unknown audiences into your followers. The next step is going from followers to fans. And this is where you have leadership. This is where you can leverage your fan base to get your fans to do a lot of the heavy lifting for you. At the point of leadership, A, people talk about you, and B, people reach out to you and say, hey, Graham, I love the podcast that you did. I want to talk to you. Now, that may not be the first touch point that you have with that fan. For a long time, they may have been a follower on your newsletter. They may have been in orbit, as we call it. They may be orbiting around you, but not activated. There's just a follower. Guess what? You do a podcast, you send it out as an announcement on your newsletter. They pick it up, they read it, they go and listen to it, and bang, it hits them right there. That's the point where they reach out to you and say, hey, Graham, you spoke for me. And you know why? You know why they'll say things like that? It's because when we work together, one of the critical, most important factors of you and me working together on this project is identifying and refining your audience avatar. You are not speaking to you guys. You are not speaking to the listeners. You are speaking to you. And you means you know exactly who your avatar is. You really have to, at the beginning, cast the net wide, and then over the next 3 steps of the thought leadership journey, start drawing that net in and getting more and more precise and clear with the audience avatar. So when you reach that pinnacle phase of leadership, you know exactly who you're leading. And when they start responding and reaching out to you, that creates this further iteration and validation of that audience avatar, because they're the people reaching out to you, telling you about their problems and how you are solving those problems with your ideas, with your conversations. That then helps you clarify the audience avatar and maintain leadership in that position. Because what you're able to do when you have a leadership position is you can ultimately lead a category. Key part of leading a category is defining it. You can talk about the pain points better than anybody else. The reason why people will consider you a leader for them is not necessarily because technically or content-wise you are better than the next guy. You simply have a more empathic and deeper understanding of their pain points. You understand what's broken, what's wrong, and how you can fix it. You talk their language. You see the world the way that they do. And that is leadership, because if you have their attention, you are their leader. And attention is the new currency of leadership. That is what we're creating here, folks. That is the 3 steps in the thought leadership journey. Yes, it takes time. Yes, it doesn't happen overnight, but it's a journey, and it's a journey worth taking, because at every single step of this journey, as you go out, as you do more podcast guesting, guess what? You start getting better at telling your story. And the virtue of telling your story is you are able to join the dots. And when you're able to join the dots, everything starts to make sense. That creates a lot of mind space when it comes to podcast guesting, because there may be lots of things that you've done in your life that may seem seemingly unrelated events. But the better you get at this, the more you create this powerful through story. And that's really when people start talking about you, because they look at what you do and it appears effortless. But what they don't see is the graft, the systems, a lot of below the water processes that are not evident when you go out there and do the podcast guesting. Those are the 3 steps, folks. I wanted to share that with you because I want you to join me on that journey, and I will be more than happy to share that journey with you and help you get up those steps and become a thought leader.